Hey, welcome back to Simply Glued Together in the devlog of the VR game 21 Conduit. What you've seen is something you can download right now with the link in the description below. It's a demo test build version, very feature limited, but it does have core mechanics working and they are ready to be tested. If you wish to give feedback, then please join the Discord channel. The link is also below in the video description. You can find updates, daily progress in the game, and the link to this build as well. But now, let's kick off the second devlog and let's talk about what has changed and what's coming in the future. Okay, so the last time I uploaded, we didn't have a name, any menu, abilities, we didn't have a UI at all, we couldn't take damage, and basically we didn't have any scoring systems, no tracking of the data whatsoever. These last 2 months, however, have been a steep development curve. Everything previously mentioned has been added, and a lot of stuff invisible to the player has been implemented, tweaked, and tuned. The gameplay loop previously was non-existent. You would take cover, duck, dodge, shoot back, and that's it. Right now, while you still do all of those things, you're also running out of time. Time is your health, time is your armor. Getting hit takes time away, eliminating enemies adds back time. This has to be tweaked. At some point, I managed to get like 20 minutes of extra gameplay time, but it is what it is. It's the core of the game. I think it's a fun mechanic. You will test it out and you will give me your feedback, obviously, and your thoughts on how it can be improved. But hey, play around with it, see how much it affects you, see how much time you have left at the end of the match. Maybe we need to lower it. It's really something that will get tuned, fine-tuned, and improved over time. In the last devlog, obviously everything that was shown was just gameplay. We didn't have a menu at that time. Basically, you would grab your pistol and the match would start. Well, we do have a menu right now. We do have the standard play and quit buttons, but we also have modifiers. Those were basically born out of necessity for me to non-stop add boolean values to cut off certain parts of the gameplay or extend them, and that's how the first three have been born, basically being the infinite mode, upgrades, enable disable toggle, and the laser. That kind of creates a more expanded gameplay loop where you can change the way you play the game. Infinite lets you have an infinite repeating arena, basically a wave system, and this will for sure stay in some form in the game as a mod for practicing certain segments in the base game so that you can actually achieve a better time on the scoreboard. Upgrades, this basically toggles if you want to have droppable upgrades in the game or not, pretty self-explanatory, and they are enabled by default. And the last option for now is the laser. I mean, it's something that came out of me testing this on the PC basically non-stop without the ability to aim with a mouse and keyboard in a VR emulation scenario. The upgrade system allows me to define which upgrades drop, what their odds are, the chances of them dropping, and once the upgrade drops, it actually has a certain lifetime on the level. Basically, after a few seconds, it goes away unless you hit it, of course. So it does expand the gameplay quite a bit, and at the moment we have health, armor drops, infinite ammo, slow motion, and the last one that I struggle always to pronounce, invulnerability. They're pretty self-explanatory. They all have different durations. Their durations do stack. So picking up 2 infinite ammos, for example, will last twice as long. They are right now pretty dynamic and can change the flow of the game at the same time. Once we add transitioning between arenas, we can basically place them around your entire path so that you can actually trigger a slow motion event at some point or get infinite ammo and like spawn 20 enemies rushing at you and certain stuff like that. So that system does add a lot to the game. The UI is really something that will go through a lot of changes. Previously, I've had the text that you've seen in the last upload, basically saying how much health and armor you have, and it was really ugly. So at some point, I switched over to a radial design that was attached to your wrist. It was kind of okay, but the more I played, I just realized I need that something different thing in the game, and that was just not to have the standard health and armor. Instead, we chose time. Displaying that time in a radial UI would have been kind of weird, so we basically now have this thing. I had to create a chest, and when I created a chest, I said, okay, we also need hips as well. So I attached the UI to the chest. The chest does rotate with a slight delay from the camera, and if only a certain angle threshold has been achieved. and the hips also do the same thing in relation to the chest. But adding those two things actually made me realize that now I can put away the magazine onto the hips and the pistol on the chest. So no more magazines and pistols flying in the air everywhere. They have a place on your body physically, and that is a great thing. It does expand the game quite a bit. It does follow you when you crouch, when you move, so it's a really nice addition to the game. Basically, that was all the stuff that the player can actually see and experience, but there's stuff that you cannot see. And the thing is, everything in this game revolves around basically pools. Pools of enemies, pools of magazines, pools of bullets, pools of particle effects, and so on. The reason for this is because destroying new stuff and spawning new stuff is rather expensive. So instead of doing that, we just basically deactivate them when needed and activate them when needed. This makes stuff incredibly faster. And another thing we do is basically you will realize on the first boot of the game there's a slight delay, slight pause, a bit of a stutter if you want, and that's in the menu, before you basically gain control of your arms and everything. The reason for that is everything at that point is spawned. I don't want to do that during loading the level or in any of those parts. So basically, as soon as you boot up the game, everything is spawned. Enemies, bullets, VFX, magazines, everything. And that ensures that later on, you just boot up a level, everything is already there. You don't have any of those pauses and any of that ugly stuff. Another thing is that we have these arenas, and then we have groups, basically. So the arena has the information about the groups, and the arena tells the groups what to do. Groups actually hold enemy spawners, and enemy spawners hold, obviously, enemies. Actually, the enemy spawners do not hold the enemies. The enemy pool holds the enemies, but the enemy spawner calls an enemy from the pool to be spawned, and the enemy spawner at the same time also has the enemy stats that will be applied to that spawned enemy. So, the arena has the first group, for example. That first group gets spawned. The spawner dictates what type of an enemy does spawn in. If it's a dynamic enemy, if it's an enemy that is static, or if it's an enemy that has an override position that it goes to first, and then it can freely move in the arena on the waypoints that exist and are predefined. Once enough enemies die, we have a trigger, and that trigger actually spawns in a new set of enemies. That trigger can also do certain interactions with the environment. In the last build, I actually had windows and doors that would open and let new enemies come into the room. In this build, this didn't seem necessary for the environment that I'm in right now, but it does allow me to expand upon it. So at some point a garage door might open and 5 enemies can come out. When it comes to the enemies though, as I've said, we have those stats. So we have light enemies, we can have heavy enemies, etc. In this build, obviously I'm focused basically on the basic of the basic, the standard enemy type. But what I can actually do dynamically is spawn enemies with armor. I can spawn enemies that move faster. I can spawn enemies that actually just do not move. I can spawn enemies that don't shoot at you, but they run at you. For example, suicide bombers and stuff like that. Or I can actually convert those enemies into civilians and have a few civilians that will randomly run from one side of the map to the other side, and if you hit them, you'll lose time. So a lot of that actually can make the game much more fun and much more dynamic again, expanding the way you approach the game, the way you play it. Obviously, through the modifiers, we can dictate if we want to have the weakest enemies only, if we want to have more armored enemies than the weakest enemies, if we want to have basically every enemy as a suicide bomber, we can do that. Again, that is coming in the future updates, but the core logic is there. 4 months ago, I did not know if I'm gonna be doing this. I've lost my job. The industry is falling apart right now. If you're in it, you know what I'm talking about. But this game that I'm making is something that makes me want to stay in this industry, to still continue expanding my knowledge, to contribute, to experiment, to build fun stuff. If you have VR, please, below in the description, there's a download link. Download the game, play it, give me your feedback. You can join the Discord channel, you can follow here on YouTube. Just please give your feedback and we can make something awesome together. A game that's fun to play, basically for everybody. And that's about it. Hope you guys have a great day. As I've said once again, below in the description, there's all the relevant links. And I'll see you guys soon once we go into the third devlog, which will hopefully have a lot of changes, or rather, a lot of additional content to make this a much better experience.